The Galactic Council did not fear humanity. In fact, most of them barely thought about humans at all. In official records, Earth was listed as a developing military species. That meant small fleets, limited territory, political division, loud debates, slow decisions. Nothing impressive, nothing dangerous. When the Velkar Dominion expanded toward the outer systems, the Council did not warn humanity. They did not need to. Everyone knew what would happen. The Velkar did not negotiate with weaker civilizations. They erased them. Velkar fleets were large, disciplined, and precise. Their warships moved in perfect formation. Their officers did not argue. Their commanders did not hesitate. They calculated, and they won. The first human colony to fall was a mining world called Ardent III. Velkar ships arrived without warning. Defense platforms were destroyed in minutes. The colony surrendered within hours. The casualty report was simple. Human losses, 4,210. Velkar losses, 12. The Council nodded when they saw the numbers. Expected. The second colony lasted longer, 6 hours. Human losses, 9,800. Velkar losses, 34. Still predictable. In the council chamber, a senior observer spoke calmly. Human resistance is emotional, not strategic. Another replied, they lack coordination. A third added, they will fracture internally within 2 cycles. The conclusion was clear. Humanity would collapse under pressure. But something strange happened. Instead of gathering into one large defensive fleet, human ships scattered. They did not defend major planets directly. They disappeared into asteroid belts, nebula clouds, unstable warp lanes. Velkar commanders considered it proof of weakness. They are running, one said. Good, another replied. Let them. The Velkar advanced deeper into human space. Then the first unusual report arrived. Velkar supply convoy destroyed near outer relay station. Velkar losses, 217. Human losses, unknown. Unknown. That word caused mild irritation. Velkar tracking systems were precise. Nothing was unknown. A second report followed. Fuel depot in captured system sabotaged. Velkar losses, 400 personnel. Human attackers not confirmed. The Velkar adjusted patrol routes. Minor annoyance. Then came a third report. A Velkar cruiser group vanished while entering a dense asteroid cluster. Search teams found wreckage. No large human fleet signatures detected. Casualty estimate, 1,900 Velkar personnel. The council leaned forward slightly. Now this was interesting. Humans were not winning battles. They were removing pieces, one by one. The Velkar responded with heavier patrols, more ships, more scanning, more force. The next casualty report changed everything. Velkar losses in 3 cycles, 4,800. Human confirmed losses, 11,200. The numbers still favored the Velkar, but the rate was shifting. Velkar ships were disappearing faster than expected. Human ships were being destroyed in large numbers too, but humans kept appearing. More small ships, more strikes, more ambushes. The Velkar began reinforcing their supply routes, and that was the moment the war changed. Because when the Velkar reinforced supply routes, they weakened front lines. Human ships struck the weakened lines. When Velkar reinforced front lines, supply chains were hit again. The Velkar were powerful, but they were rigid. Humans were chaotic, but chaos is hard to predict. Weeks passed, then months. The Velkar launched a major offensive against a human shipyard orbiting the planet Kestra 9. It was supposed to end the resistance. The battle lasted 4 days. Human defense fleets were destroyed in high numbers. Velkar commanders celebrated early. Then the shipyard detonated, not by Velkar fire, by human command. The explosion crippled 2 Velkar battleships. Human losses, catastrophic. Velkar losses, severe. The Council began requesting updated projections. The projection models struggled. The numbers no longer behaved normally. Then came the report that froze the chamber. Total Velkar fleet casualties since the war began, 47,000. The room fell silent. That number was impossible. The Velkar had never lost that many personnel against a developing species. A council analyst rechecked the data. It was correct. Human casualties were higher, much higher, but that was not the shock. The shock was that humanity had not collapsed, they had not surrendered, they had not fractured. Instead, new fleets were appearing, smaller, faster, more aggressive. Civilian transports were converted into missile carriers. Mining lasers were repurposed as weapons. Commercial factories were building drones. Human broadcasts were calm. Short messages repeated across channels. "We endure." That phrase confused Velkar strategists. Most species fought to win. Humans fought to survive. And survival had no surrender clause. Velkar commanders began requesting reinforcements from core systems. The Dominion High Command approved reluctantly. They still believed victory was certain, but certainty was becoming expensive. The next casualty report arrived 3 cycles later. Velkar losses, 63,000. Human losses, classified. Classified. The Council questioned that immediately. Why classify casualty numbers during war? The answer was simple. Because humans did not want the number to matter. They did not want morale to depend on comfort. They wanted morale to depend on purpose. The Velkar believed humans would break when losses became too high. But humans did something different. Each destroyed colony strengthened recruitment. Each fallen fleet strengthened resolve. Each loss hardened public support. Instead of panic, there was unity. And unity under pressure is dangerous. In the Velkar Command Center, a senior strategist finally asked the question no one wanted to say out loud. How many humans are willing to die? Silence followed. Then the second question asked, how many Velkar can we afford to lose? That was the moment the Dominion began to feel something new. Not fear, not yet. Uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads. Across the galaxy, analysts updated classifications. Humanity was no longer minor military power. They were something else, something harder to measure. Because the galaxy had dismissed humanity until the casualty numbers came in. And the numbers did not show victory. They showed endurance. And endurance changes wars.
The Velkar Dominion had never faced a war like this. They had fought rebellions. They had crushed pirate alliances. They had erased species that resisted. But this was different. Humans were not fighting correctly. That was the problem. Velkar fleets were built on order. Every ship had a place. Every formation had purpose. Attack patterns were calculated to minimize loss and maximize damage. Efficiency was strength, but humans were not efficient. Human fleets moved unpredictably. One day they defended a system heavily. The next day they abandoned it. One battle looked desperate. The next looked carefully planned. Velkar commanders called it chaos. They believed chaos would collapse under pressure. Instead, chaos adapted. Inside a Velkar war chamber, a tactical display flickered with red alerts.
Another fuel convoy lost, an officer said. How? The commander demanded. Small human strike group, only 6 ships. 6? The commander repeated in disbelief. Yes. How many Velkar escorts? 12. The commander clenched his jaw. How did 6 defeat 12? They did not engage directly. The display zoomed in. Human ships had triggered sensor decoys in an asteroid field. Velkar ships split to pursue false targets. Human vessels struck engines from blind angles, then vanished. It was not glorious, it was surgical. Across human space, war councils looked very different. There were no perfect formations, no silent obedience. Commanders argued openly, voices were raised, maps changed every hour. Civilian advisors sat beside admirals, engineers spoke during battle briefings. To Velkar observers it looked unstable, but inside the chaos, information flowed. Human captains were given freedom. They were not told exactly how to fight. They were told what must survive. That difference mattered. A young human fleet commander named Tal reported to Central Command after a successful strike. "We lost 3 ships," he said calmly, "but we forced them to reroute supply chains." "How long will that delay them?" someone asked. 2 cycles. And what did it cost them? 7 ships, 400 personnel, and confidence. Confidence. That word appeared more often in reports. Velkar confidence was declining because Velkar ships were strong in formation, but humans avoided formation battles. When Velkar assembled overwhelming force, humans retreated. When Velkar split forces, humans struck. Velkar leaders increased fleet size again. They believed scale would crush resistance. Instead, scale slowed them. Large fleets required fuel. Fuel required protection. Protection required ships. Ships required coordination. The larger the Velkar presence became, the more targets humans had. Then something even more unusual began happening. Human civilian ships entered war zones. Cargo haulers, mining transports, agricultural freighters. Velkar commanders laughed when they saw them. Desperation, one said. Until those cargo ships released automated drone swarms. Thousands of small attack units, cheap, replaceable, deadly in groups. Velkar defense systems were designed for heavy warships, not swarms. Losses increased. Not massive battles, constant bleeding, cut after cut. Across the Dominion territory, families began receiving more death notices. Factories extended working hours, production quotas rose, and still, human fleets kept appearing. A Velkar strategist studied long-term projections again. "If current loss rate continues," he said quietly, "fleet sustainability drops below safe threshold in 12 cycles." "That is impossible," a superior replied. "Humans are losing more ships than we are." "Yes," the strategist agreed, "but their production rate is accelerating." The room grew silent. Human shipyards were multiplying. Civilian industry had shifted fully to war economy. Human media broadcasts did not hide losses. They honored them publicly. Names were spoken, faces shown, but the message was always the same: we continue. Velkar leaders found this strange. Most species hid casualties to prevent panic. Humans revealed them and became stronger, because grief turned into unity, and unity under threat was powerful. Then came the Battle of the Shattered Belt. Velkar fleets cornered 3 human squadrons inside a dense asteroid field. Escape seemed impossible. Velkar commanders moved in to crush them. Human ships did not run. They lured. They transmitted false signals. They triggered mining charges hidden inside asteroids. The entire belt erupted. Velkar ships collided. Navigation failed.
Human vessels slipped through gaps created by chaos. Velkar losses, 8,200. Human losses, 5,900. High, painful, but strategic victory. Velkar officers began speaking differently, not publicly, privately. They are learning our responses. They anticipate reinforcement patterns. They force us to react. Reaction meant loss of initiative. Velkar had always dictated tempo. Now, humans were. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, analysts updated models again. Human war doctrine was reclassified from disorganized resistance to adaptive distributed warfare. The phrase sounded academic, but it meant something simple. Humans fought like a storm, not a wall. A wall can be broken. A storm moves around obstacles and keeps coming. Velkar morale reports began including a new word, fatigue, not from exhaustion, from uncertainty. Every patrol could be an ambush. Every system could hide a strike group. Every quiet region could explode without warning. The Velkar had superior firepower, but they could not predict where to apply it, and power without certainty is inefficient. Human command continued evolving. Small ships carried modular weapons, crews trained in multiple roles. No fleet depended on a single command ship. If one leader fell, another stepped up. Decentralized command, flexible response. Velkar command was centralized, precise, efficient, but fragile if disrupted. Humans had discovered that. They targeted communication hubs, warp gate relays, signal amplifiers. Not the biggest ships, the structure behind the ships. And slowly, Velkar dominance began to thin. Not collapse, thin. The casualty numbers kept rising. Velkar losses crossed 70,000. Human losses unknown, but human fleet activity did not decrease. It increased. In the Dominion High Command's chamber, a senior officer finally spoke the unthinkable. We may not be able to win quickly. The statement was not defeat, but it was doubt, and doubt spreads faster than ships, because doubt does not need fuel. It only needs numbers, and the numbers were no longer predictable. The galaxy had dismissed humanity, believed they were weak, believed they were divided, but divided minds can unite under threat, and chaos, when guided by purpose, becomes strategy. The Velkar still believed they would win, but now they were no longer certain when, and that small uncertainty was the beginning of change.
The Velkar Dominion had reached its limit of patience. For cycles, they had tolerated human resistance. They had called it chaos. They had called it desperation. Now they called it a problem. And the Dominion did not allow problems to grow. In the High Command Chamber of the Velkar core world, a final decision was made. Total offensive. No scattered patrols. No divided fleets. No more slow bleeding. They would gather everything. Every major warship. Every carrier. Every heavy cruiser. They would strike one human stronghold, crush it completely, and end the illusion of human endurance. The target was Rathar Prime, a key human industrial world near the border. It built ships, it trained officers, it symbolized resistance. If Rathar fell, human morale would collapse. That was the plan. Velkar fleets assembled in numbers never seen before. Hundreds of capital ships, thousands of support vessels. The formation stretched across space like a moving wall of metal. Human long-range sensors detected it immediately. Inside Rathar's defense command, alarms echoed. Admiral Kale Oren stood over the central table. He did not shout. He did not panic. He studied the projection. "They're done playing," one officer said quietly. "Yes," Kale replied. "So are we." Evacuation began immediately. Civilian ships lifted off in waves. Factories switched to overload production. Orbital defense platforms powered up. But everyone knew this would not be enough. Human fleets moved to intercept, not to win, to delay. The first clash happened near the outer asteroid ring. Human ships attacked in waves, fast strikes, missile swarms, drone clouds. Velkar formations held steady. Their firepower was overwhelming. Human ships exploded one after another. The casualty count climbed rapidly. Human losses, 3,000, then 7,000, then 12,000. Velkar losses were lower, much lower. In the council chamber, observers watched silently. "This is the end," one analyst whispered. But on Rathar Prime, human command did something unexpected. Instead of pulling back remaining ships to defend orbit, they pushed forward, directly into Velkar formation. It looked suicidal. Velkar commanders welcomed it. "Finally," one said, "they fight properly." The battle intensified. Human cruisers rammed larger Velkar vessels after shields collapsed. Disabled ships were not abandoned. They were redirected, set on collision courses. Velkar formations began breaking to avoid impact. Gaps opened. Through those gaps, small human strike ships slipped through, not aiming at the biggest targets, aiming at communication nodes, fleet coordination relays, command carriers. Velkar discipline faltered. For the first time, orders arrived late. Targeting became confused. Human ships inside formation triggered close-range detonations, not random, timed, calculated. Velkar losses began rising sharply. Admiral Kale watched from Rathar's command deck. "Phase 2, he ordered quietly. Deep within Rathar's orbit, massive orbital shipyards powered down. Velkar scanners detected energy buildup. "Target shipyard clusters," Velkar command ordered. Too late. Human engineers had rigged them. The shipyards were empty, evacuated hours before. When Velkar heavy ships moved into firing range, the entire orbital ring detonated. A controlled chain reaction. The explosion tore through Velkar front lines. 3 capital ships were destroyed instantly. Shockwaves destabilized nearby formations. Velkar losses surged past projections. But the cost was brutal. Human fleet strength was collapsing. Admiral Kale knew the truth. They could not stop the Dominion completely. They could only make the cost unbearable. Surface bombardment began. Velkar warships fired on Rathar's cities. Defense shields held briefly, then failed. Firestorms spread. Civilian structures burned. Casualty numbers rose rapidly. Human command did not surrender. Instead, they activated hidden defense arrays buried under the planet's crust. Mass driver cannons, experimental weapons never before used. Velkar ships in low orbit were struck unexpectedly. Hull breaches, reactor overloads, more Velkar losses. In the Dominion command vessel, silence filled the bridge. Projected casualty numbers climbed beyond acceptable range. "Losses exceed strategic prediction," an officer said. "Continue offensive," the commander replied. But hesitation had entered his voice. Rathar Prime was burning. Human fleet strength was nearly gone, yet Velkar losses were catastrophic. The battle lasted 12 days. 12 days of constant fire. 12 days of sacrifice. At the end, Rathar Prime still stood. Damaged, scarred, but standing. Velkar fleets withdrew, not in defeat, in shock. Final confirmed casualties. Human losses, extreme. Velkar losses, devastating. More than any single engagement in Dominion history against a developing species. In the Galactic Council chamber,
No one spoke for a long time. The numbers were displayed in cold light. The Velkar had won territory, but they had lost too much. And humanity, despite terrible losses, had not broken. On Earth, broadcasts honored Rathar's defenders. No speeches of victory, only names, thousands of names, and one simple message repeated across human space: we are still here. In the Dominion High Command Chamber, an admiral asked the question that changed everything. If one human world costs this much, he paused, what will 10 cost? Silence followed, because for the first time, the Velkar realized something terrifying. Humans did not need to win battles, they only needed to survive them. And survival, when combined with adaptation, turns into strength. The breaking point was not Rathar's fall, it was Velkar doubt. The Dominion had thrown everything at humanity, and humanity had absorbed the impact, bleeding, burning, but unbroken. The galaxy had dismissed humans. Now it began calculating them, and the numbers were no longer comforting.
The battle for Rethar Prime ended, but the war changed. Velkar fleets returned to their core systems carrying damaged ships and worse news. They had taken the planet's orbit, they had burned cities, they had destroyed thousands of human vessels, yet they had not broken humanity. That fact spread faster than official reports. Inside the Dominion, casualty lists grew long, longer than expected. Families of Velkar officers began asking quiet questions. How could a minor species cause this? The High Command did not answer publicly. Instead, they adjusted numbers. They labeled losses as acceptable. They described Rethar as a strategic victory. But private projections told another story. Fleet sustainability had dropped below safe margin. Repair docks were overwhelmed, replacement crews were undertrained, and the war was far from over. Meanwhile, human space did not collapse. Rethar Prime burned, but evacuation had saved millions. Factories on inner worlds increased production. Civilian volunteers joined defense forces. Recruitment lines stretched across major cities. Human broadcasts did not promise revenge. They promised endurance. We are not finished. That sentence repeated across networks. Velkar intelligence officers intercepted the message thousands of times. They studied it. They did not understand it. Most species would have begged for peace after Rethar. Humans rebuilt. In the Dominion's capital, a senior strategist presented a new projection. If current conflict continues, he said quietly, we reach fleet depletion threshold within 14 cycles. The High Commander stared at him. Impossible. It is mathematics, the strategist replied. We still outnumber them. Yes, the strategist agreed, but their production curve is rising, ours is flattening. That was the problem. Human shipyards multiplied under pressure. Velkar shipyards were already operating at maximum. There was no room to grow, only room to strain. On the outer edges of Velkar territory, small human strike teams continued their work. No massive battles, no dramatic announcements, just precise attacks. Fuel depots, repair stations, data relays. Every strike small, but constant. Velkar patrols became nervous. Every asteroid field looked suspicious. Every empty system felt like a trap. Fatigue set in. Not physical fatigue, psychological fatigue. Uncertainty. And uncertainty weakens discipline. A Velkar cruiser captain hesitated before entering a debris field. That hesitation cost him timing. Timing cost formation. Formation cost shields. A human ambush destroyed the cruiser. The loss was not large, but the hesitation was recorded. Commanders began overcorrecting, sending larger patrols, allocating more ships to defense, which meant fewer ships on offense. Human analysts noticed the shift. "They're guarding themselves now," one officer said. "Yes," another replied, "they're reacting." Reaction meant loss of control, and the Velkar had always controlled the pace of war. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, observers reviewed the situation carefully. "The Velkar are slowing," one analyst noted. "Humans are stabilizing," another added. A third leaned forward. "They are adapting faster than predicted." The council speaker remained silent, but something had changed. Humanity was no longer dismissed in reports. Now they were categorized as high-resilience adversary. That phrase carried weight. Meanwhile, inside the Velkar civilian sectors, whispers spread. Trade routes were disrupted, military funding increased, consumer goods declined, and the question began appearing in private networks. Why is this war taking so long? Velkar leaders attempted a new tactic: intimidation. They broadcast warnings directly to human systems: surrender to prevent further loss. Human response was simple: "We endure." That phrase again. It frustrated Velkar commanders. They expected emotional reactions, anger, desperation. Instead, they received calm persistence. Human fleets avoided decisive confrontation, but they never disappeared. They were always somewhere, always striking, always present. A Velkar officer studying combat data finally spoke a dangerous truth. "They are not trying to defeat us quickly." "What are they trying to do?" his superior asked. "They are trying to make this too expensive." Silence filled the room, because expense was measurable, and the numbers were growing uncomfortable. Casualty totals crossed 90,000 Velkar personnel, a number no one had predicted at the beginning of the war. Human losses remained high, but human fleet size remained stable. The Dominion began diverting ships from other regions. Border defenses weakened. Neutral systems noticed. Confidence in Velkar dominance began to fade. The war was no longer just about humans, it was about perception. If the Velkar could not crush a minor species, what did that say about their strength? Inside the Dominion High Command, tension escalated. "We escalate further," one general argued, "total bombardment of remaining industrial worlds." "And risk further catastrophic losses," another countered. "They cannot endure forever." "They do not need forever," the strategist replied quietly. "They need us to doubt." That word again, doubt. It had entered Velkar vocabulary too often. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Kale addressed a gathering of fleet commanders. He did not promise victory. He did not exaggerate strength. He showed numbers. "We have lost much. We will lose more." Silence. "But they are losing certainty." He pointed to Velkar fleet allocation shifts. "They are guarding. They are reacting. They are unsure." He looked at the room. That is the crack. Human commanders understood. They did not need to break the Dominion. They needed to widen the crack. Weeks passed. Human forces launched synchronized strikes across 5 separate systems. Not heavy attacks, just enough to force Velkar redeployment. Velkar fleets moved defensively, and, for the first time, human worlds experienced relative calm. It was not victory, but it was breathing room. Across the galaxy, analysts updated projections again. If current conflict continues at current rate, Velkar's strategic dominance would decline permanently. That realization shook the council. The Velkar were not losing territory, but they were losing invincibility, and invincibility was more important. The psychological shift was complete. Humanity was no longer prey, they were cost. And cost changes decisions. The Dominion had begun the war certain. Now they calculated risk.
and calculation under uncertainty is slower, more cautious, less aggressive. The galaxy had dismissed humanity, believed they would fracture, believed they would surrender. Instead, they endured. And endurance forced the strongest power in the region to hesitate. And hesitation is the beginning of retreat.
The war did not end with a single explosion. It ended with a question. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, the question echoed across a silent hall. How long can the Velkar sustain this? No one answered immediately, because the answer was uncomfortable. The Velkar Dominion was still powerful, their fleets were still larger, their territory was still vast. But power is not only about size, it is about stability. And stability was shifting. Casualty numbers crossed 100,000 Velkar personnel. That number had never appeared in modern Dominion history, not against a developing species, not against anyone. Across neutral systems, analysts began reviewing old classifications. Humanity was once labeled minor. That word disappeared from reports. It was replaced with something new, strategic disruptor. The council speaker called an emergency session, not public, not broadcast, closed doors, high-level members only. The projection table showed 3 curves, Velkar losses rising, human losses rising, but something else rising faster, human production capacity. Factories across human space had doubled output. New shipyards had appeared in systems previously considered secondary. Civilian industries had fully transitioned to war footing. Velkar production had plateaued. There was no room left to grow. "Explain this," the speaker said quietly. An analyst stepped forward. "Humans are decentralized," he said. "Their industry is distributed across many systems." Meaning? Destroying one hub does not cripple them. Silence followed. The Velkar system was centralized, efficient, but dependent on major shipyard clusters, and humans had learned that. Human strike teams had targeted key Velkar industrial nodes, not enough to destroy them, enough to slow them. Slow production meant longer recovery time. Longer recovery meant prolonged war, and prolonged war favored endurance. Meanwhile, inside Velkar territory, public morale declined quietly. Official media still reported strategic advantage, but families noticed delays in communication. Supply shortages began appearing in outer cities. Recruitment efforts intensified, and for the first time, some Velkar questioned leadership decisions. That question was dangerous, because the Dominion had built identity around dominance. If dominance weakened, identity weakened. Inside the High Command Chamber, senior generals argued. "We escalate fully," one demanded, "total planetary eradication." "And lose more fleets," another countered. "Our loss ratio increases every cycle. They are bleeding too." "Yes," the strategist replied, "but they bleed forward, we bleed backward." That sentence silenced the room. Humans lost ships, but every loss created stronger resolve. Velkar losses created hesitation. The difference was subtle, but it mattered. Across the galaxy, minor alliances began adjusting policy. Trade routes shifted away from Velkar territory. Neutral powers increased diplomatic contact with human systems. Not alliances, not yet, but conversations. The council speaker noticed the pattern. The war was no longer isolated. It was influencing perception, and perception shaped power. If the Velkar could not crush humanity, others might test them. That possibility unsettled the chamber. The speaker finally asked the question that no one wanted to hear. What happens if humanity wins? Silence. Not because victory seemed likely, but because win no longer meant conquest. It meant survival. If humans survived long enough, they would emerge respected, and respect
shifts balance. In human space, Admiral Kale reviewed strategic reports. Velkar fleet movements had changed, less aggression, more defensive clustering. "They are protecting themselves now," an officer said. "Yes," Kale replied. "They're afraid of being exposed." "Do we push harder?" Kale studied the projections carefully. "No," he said finally. "We maintain pressure, not escalation." The goal was not annihilation. The goal was exhaustion. Humans could not match Velkar firepower, but they could match time. Time was now a weapon. The next coordinated human strike hit 3 Velkar logistics hubs simultaneously. Small teams, precise timing, minimal human fleet exposure. Velkar losses were moderate, but response required massive redeployment, more cost, more delay. Inside the Dominion, a senior economic advisor presented an alarming report. "If conflict continues at current pace," he said quietly, "civil production drops below stability threshold within 8 cycles." The High Commander stared at the projection. "That is unacceptable." "Yes," the advisor agreed, "but mathematically inevitable." Inevitable. The word felt unfamiliar in that room. The Velkar had always dictated inevitability. Now they faced it. The council reconvened for open session. Public broadcast resumed. The speaker addressed the galaxy. "The Velkar Dominion continues strategic operations," it announced. "Human resistance remains contained." But the tone had changed. Less certainty, more caution. Observers across multiple species noticed it immediately. The invincible Dominion sounded careful. In private, Velkar diplomats began discreet outreach to neutral systems, seeking trade stabilization, seeking support, seeking reassurance. Human intelligence intercepted these communications. Admiral Kale allowed himself a small nod. "They are bracing," he said. "For what?" a young officer asked. "For the possibility that this war does not end how they planned." Across the galaxy, something subtle shifted. Humanity was no longer viewed as reckless or weak or divided. They were viewed as stubborn, persistent, dangerous in a new way. Because humans did not collapse under pressure, they absorbed it, adapted to it, and reflected it back slowly. The war had reached a turning point, not because Velkar fleets were destroyed, but because Velkar certainty was, and certainty, once cracked, does not return easily. The galaxy realized something important. The Velkar were not unstoppable, and humans were not breakable. That combination was powerful. The casualty numbers had shocked everyone, but the true shock was this: humanity was not trying to win quickly. They were trying to make the war unsustainable, and unsustainable wars force empires to choose: continue and weaken, or stop and adjust. The Velkar Dominion now faced that choice, and the entire galaxy watched. Because if the Velkar stepped back, even slightly, history would remember the moment a minor species forced the strongest power in the region to reconsider, and that reconsideration was the beginning of a new balance. The galaxy had dismissed humanity until the casualty numbers came in. Now it was recalculating.
The war did not end with surrender. It ended with silence. Not the silence of destruction, the silence of hesitation. Velkar fleets stopped advancing. No announcement was made at first, no public declaration. They simply slowed. Outer human systems that expected invasion saw Velkar ships hold position instead of pushing forward. Patrol routes shortened, aggressive scans decreased. Then came the message, not to the galaxy, to humanity. A secure transmission, Velkar High Command requesting strategic dialogue. The wording was careful. It did not say negotiation. It did not say ceasefire. But everyone understood. The Dominion had reached its limit. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, tension filled the air. The speaker reviewed the final projections. If war continued, Velkar fleet strength would drop below dominance threshold within 1 standard year. Human fleet strength would remain unstable, but active, and active was enough. The Council had seen the truth clearly now. Humanity was not stronger, humanity was not richer, humanity was not more advanced, but humanity was harder to stop than expected. And that miscalculation had cost the Dominion dearly. On Earth, Admiral Kao received the Velkar transmission in silence. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He studied it. "They want terms," an officer said. "No," Kao replied. "They want limits." That was different. Velkar pride would never allow the word defeat, but limits? Limits were acceptable. Negotiations began in neutral space. No fleets, no weapons locked, just representatives. Velkar commanders stood tall, armored, disciplined. Human representatives arrived without heavy ceremony, simple uniforms, no grand display. The Velkar envoy spoke first. "This conflict has demonstrated unexpected resistance." Unexpected, that word carried weight. Human envoy Commander Aris responded calmly. "We demonstrated survival." Silence followed. The Velkar envoy continued. "The Dominion proposes mutual border stabilization," which meant no further expansion into human territory. It was not an apology, but it was retreat. Aris did not rush. "What guarantees?" he asked. "Fleet repositioning." "How far?" "Beyond contested sectors." "How permanent?" The Velkar envoy hesitated. That hesitation was everything. "Long term." The agreement was drafted slowly, carefully. The Velkar would withdraw heavy fleets from human borders. Human forces would halt deep strikes into Velkar supply chains. No formal alliance, no friendship, but no more advance. When the announcement was finally broadcast across the galaxy, reactions were immediate. Neutral systems were stunned. Minor powers were shocked. Because for the first time in modern history, the Velkar Dominion had stopped expanding. Not due to rebellion, not due to internal collapse, but because a developing species had made expansion too costly. Across human space, there were no massive celebrations. There were memorials, names read aloud, images displayed, cities rebuilt quietly. Shipyards continued production, not for revenge, but for readiness. Human leaders understood something clearly. This was not permanent peace. It was respect earned through endurance. In Velkar territory, the mood was complex. Relief, frustration, confusion. Official broadcasts framed the outcome as strategic stabilization, but citizens noticed the truth. The Dominion had adjusted, and adjustment meant vulnerability. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, the speaker addressed members privately. Humanity was underestimated, it said. No one disagreed. They do not dominate through superiority. They dominate through persistence. That statement echoed. Persistence. It was not glamorous, it was not dramatic, but it was effective. A senior counselor spoke quietly. "If they continue adapting at this rate," the speaker finished the sentence, "they will not remain minor." That possibility changed long-term galactic projections. Trade agreements with humanity increased. Diplomatic channels opened cautiously, because no one wanted to fight a species that had already proven it could endure heavy loss and still stand. Years later, military academies across the galaxy studied the conflict. They did not focus on individual battles. They focused on cost analysis. The human attrition model became required study. It described a strategy where victory was not defined by territory gained, but by enemy exhaustion. A Velkar instructor once summarized the lesson to cadets. "Never assume weakness based on internal division." He paused.
especially if that division becomes unity under threat. Back on Earth, Admiral Kale visited Rethar Prime. The scars of bombardment remained visible, but new structures rose from the ruins. Children walked beneath rebuilt towers. Factories operated again. He stood quietly overlooking the city. An aide approached. "Do you think they'll try again?" she asked. Kale looked towards the stars. "Yes." "Then why do we stop now?" He answered simply, "Because now they know." Know what? That we don't break. That knowledge was more powerful than fleet numbers, more powerful than weapon size. The galaxy had dismissed humanity. It had labeled them weak, divided, unstable. But when pressure came, humans unified. When attacked, humans adapted. When pushed, humans endured. And endurance changed everything. The final casualty numbers were archived in Council records. Velkar losses, 118,000. Human losses, classified. The classification itself became legend, because the exact number did not matter. What mattered was that humanity was still standing, still building, still learning. The Dominion did not collapse, but it changed, more cautious, more calculating, less certain. And certainty was the true casualty of the war. Across the galaxy, a new phrase began circulating quietly among strategists. Never dismiss the species that survives its own chaos. Because chaos, when guided by purpose, becomes resilience, and resilience outlasts power. The war ended not with triumph, but with recalculation. And in that recalculation, the galaxy understood something fundamental. Humans were not dangerous because they were strongest. They were dangerous because they refused to quit. And once a species proves it cannot be broken, you do not try to break it again lightly. The galaxy had written off humanity until the casualty numbers came in. Now, humanity was written into every future projection, not as prey, not as minor, but as factor. And in galactic politics, being a factor is power.